Right now, this is our time in the studio with Carolina Carreau. I welcome the viewers of Freedom. Let's get straight to the important news. 2 people have died in Kherson due to Russian shelling. The enemy launched an artillery strike on the city center. A cafe was damaged in the attack. This was reported by the regional prosecutor's office. In addition to the 2 fatalities, 3 more people sustained injuries of varying severity. Police officers took them to the hospital. Preliminarily, all of them have mine explosive injuries. 5 people were wounded as a result of Russian shelling in this Zaporizhzhia. The Russian army carried out 700 strikes on 30 settlements in the region. They mainly used drones, multiple rocket launchers, and artillery for the attacks. Despite constant attacks, power engineers have restored electricity for residents of the part of Zaporizhzhia region controlled by Ukraine. The situation in Kryvyi Rih, Dnipro region, remains difficult but under control. This was reported by the head of the city's defense council, Alexander Vilko. He clarified that as of this morning, out of 8 people injured, 2 are still in the hospital. The electricity situation in some parts of the city remains difficult. Let me remind you. The day before, the Russian army carried out one of the most massive attacks on Kryvyi Rih since the start of the full-scale invasion. Because of the strikes, more than 30 boiler houses were shut down. By morning, all of them were operating normally, except for one, which is powered by a generator, and the heating supply there is just starting up. The city is also experiencing pipe bursts due to water hammer. There is also an emergency situation in Dnipro. As reported by the city mayor, Boris Filatov, specialists are doing everything they can to stabilize and restore electricity, heating, and water supply, which were disrupted by the massive Russian attack on Thursday night. In addition, power is gradually being restored in the hospital, and the city sewage system is also functioning. The left bank of Dnipro is being supported by alternative power sources. The water situation on the right bank is gradually stabilizing. At the same time, according to Filatov, electric transport has been replaced by buses. Kindergartens are operating with duty groups for 4 hours, and school holidays have been extended until January 11th. In total, about 800,000 consumers remain without electricity in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Restoration work is ongoing, according to Acting Minister of Energy of Ukraine, Artem Nekrasov. And according to him, as of today, it has already been possible to partially restore centralized water and heating systems in several settlements. Repair crews are working in enhanced mode.
The enemy has dealt another blow to Ukraine's energy sector. The enemy has launched yet another attack on Ukraine's energy sector. As a result of the attack, they were almost completely left without power. Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia reaches. Energy workers began restoration efforts during the night. By morning, about 800,000 consumers in the Dnipropetrovsk region remained without electricity. Repair work continues in the region to restore power and heat to consumers. Power supply to social and critical infrastructure facilities has been partially restored. As a result of the strikes, 8 mines in the Dnipropetrovsk region were also left without power. All workers were brought to the surface by morning.
There is no military sense in such Russian strikes. In this way, the aggressor is simply trying to break Ukraine's spirit. This is how Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded to the massive strikes on the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions. He also called on international partners to respond to Russia's strikes on energy and infrastructure, which leave people without electricity and heating in winter conditions.
It is important that our partners around the world respond to this kind of abuse by Russia against people. There is no military sense in it, in such strikes on energy and infrastructure that leave Ukrainians without electricity and heating in the middle of winter. This is Russia's war specifically against our people, against life in Ukraine, an attempt to break Ukraine. That is why support for our resilience, all forms of assistance to our state, must work to the fullest extent. Diplomatic processes cannot be a reason to delay the supply of air defense systems and equipment that help protect lives. We are working with our partners to ensure the response is adequate. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, Telegram. On the
night of January 8th, Russia launched 97 drones at Ukraine, including Shahed and Garand types. This was reported by the command of the Ukrainian Air Force. The defenders of Ukraine's skies shot down 70 drones. The attacks were repelled by aviation, anti-aircraft missile troops, electronic warfare, and drone units, as well as mobile fire groups of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces recorded 275 combat clashes on the front line over the past day. In the hottest sector, Pokrovsk, Ukrainian defenders repelled 77 Russian assaults. There were 40 combat engagements on the Huliaipole section of the front. Near Konstantinivka, the occupiers made 22 attempts to attack, and on the Lyman direction, 18. The Russians are once again trying to pass off wishful thinking as reality. This time, they claim to have allegedly captured Andriivka in the Sumy region. However, the communications center of the Kursk military group stated that this information does not correspond to reality, and that the settlement has been and remains under the full control of the defense forces. Ukrainian defenders noted that Russian troops only tried to expand the occupation zone in the Sumy region, but have not succeeded. Another 1,400 Russian occupiers were eliminated by Ukraine's defense forces over the past day, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Thus, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion have reached 1 million and almost 216,000 personnel. In addition, Ukrainian defenders destroyed 6 tanks, 4 armored combat vehicles, 17 artillery pieces, and 1 multiple launch rocket system yesterday. They also disabled 112 units of Russian automotive equipment. Britain has supplied Ukraine with 13 Raven air defense systems and 2 Grapehawk systems. This will help strengthen defenses against aerial threats, including Russian drones, aircraft, and helicopters. It is expected that several more Grapehawk systems designed to protect critical infrastructure will arrive soon, from long-range strikes. The Raven system adapts missiles for ground launch and provides a rapid response to threats near the front line. According to the contract, another 15 systems will be delivered soon. On January 7th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in the Republic of Cyprus to take part in the official ceremony marking Cyprus's presidency of the Council of the European Union. The head of state held talks with the country's president, the head of the European Commission, and the president of the European Council. My colleague, Kristina Dombrovskaya, will tell you more about this in detail.
The priorities of Cyprus's presidency in the EU Council, defense assistance from EU member states to Ukraine, first and foremost strengthening air defense, and progress in Kyiv's negotiations on joining the European Union. These were the key topics of the negotiations between Volodymyr Zelensky and the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Council, Antonio Costa, and the president of the Republic of Cyprus, Nikos Christodoulidis. Ukraine is counting on strong decisions in the next 6 months, said the president of Ukraine.
We expect a lot from this presidency. This moment is very important for Ukraine, just as it is for Cyprus. Ukraine deserves to be part of the European family. And we hope, Mr. President, that your presidency will help in this process.
A few weeks ago, Nikos Christodoulidis visited Kyiv. At that time, he promised that his country would make supporting Ukraine a priority during its presidency of the Council of the European Union. On January 7th, at a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, he confirmed this. Cyprus will make every effort to continue multilateral support for Ukraine at all levels.
We're facing a number of geopolitical challenges that affect our union. It is precisely for this reason that we steadfastly support Ukraine as it defends its sovereignty, its independence, and its territorial integrity. I have repeatedly emphasized that we will continue to adhere to this policy.
Cyprus intends to continue the front-loading format initiated by Denmark, which allows work on the negotiation clusters for Ukraine's accession to the EU, despite Hungary's blockade of their opening. In turn, Volodymyr Zelensky assured that Ukraine will work over the next 6 months to make as much progress as possible on this path.
Nikos and I were just talking about the fact that Ukraine remains one of the Republic's top priorities, Cyprus at the head of the Council of Europe. And we hope that all negotiation clusters will be opened simultaneously. During your presidency, we hope to see the start of the implementation of the aid package for Ukraine, which will strengthen resilience, both ours and Europe's.
Tightening sanctions against Russia is one of the central topics of the talks between Volodymyr Zelensky and Nikos Christodoulidis. As a member state of the European Union, the Republic of Cyprus joined the restrictions in response to the full-scale war unleashed by Russia against Ukraine. "We are on the right side of history. We will keep moving forward," declared the president of Cyprus. According to Deutsche Welle, in 2024, the Cypriot authorities revoked the citizenship of 77 foreigners who had obtained golden passports under the Republic's investment program. Among those on this list were 7 Russian billionaires, including Oleg Deripaska and Mikhail Gusariev. By the way, Cyprus suspended its golden passport program in 2020 due to numerous abuses. In 2019, it became known that about 40% of the passports under the program had been issued to Russian citizens. And in 2025, Cyprus introduced criminal liability for circumventing sanctions, with penalties of up to 5 years in prison and fines of up to 100,000 euros for individuals. In this way, the country fulfilled the requirements of the European Parliament directive, which obliges all member states to introduce such regulations.
The jurisdiction of Cyprus, it will be considered a crime to provide economic resources to sanctioned individuals. This applies in particular to Russians holding a Cypriot passport. Violations of the law may include having accounts in sanctioned Russian banks, working for companies on the EU sanctions list, as well as providing services, such as consulting, to businesses with Russian involvement. From a publication by Deutsche Welle, Facebook.
During its presidency of the EU Council, Cyprus pledged to ensure proper enforcement of European Union sanctions against Russia and Belarus. This is stated in the presidency program. Christina Dombrovska for Freedom TV channel.
And now I'd like to suggest a topic for discussion, which we will talk about with our guest on the air. But first, let me bring you up to speed. U.S. President Donald Trump has given the green light to the party bill on introducing new sanctions against Russia. This was reported by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham on the social network X after a meeting with the American leader, which he called productive. According to Graham, the document provides for measures against countries that buy Russian oil, since by doing so, they are financing Vladimir Putin's war machine. The senator clarified that the bill is expected to be put to a vote as early as next week.
This will be timely, since Ukraine is making concessions for the sake of peace, while Putin only talks and continues to kill innocent people. This bill will give President Trump tremendous leverage over countries like China, India, and Brazil to encourage them to stop buying cheap Russian oil, which is funding Putin's bloodshed against Ukraine. Lindsey Graham, U.S. Senator from the Republican Party, on social network X.
Donald Trump discussed the issue of peace in Ukraine in a phone conversation with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And let me remind you that earlier, the British Prime Minister had already discussed security guarantees for Ukraine with the US President twice. This includes the possible deployment of British troops in Ukraine, according to Reuters. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian delegation in Paris discussed security guarantees and the approach to a just peace with national security advisors and the US delegation. This was reported by the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Kirilo Budanov.
On the second day of talks with partners in Paris, the agenda focused on security and peace. We had a productive conversation with national security advisors and held a meeting with the U.S. delegation. Key topics: security guarantees and coordination of further steps to bring about a just peace. I thank our partners for the constructive dialogue and support for Ukraine. Kirilo Budanov, head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The bilateral document on security guarantees for Ukraine is essentially ready to be finalized at the highest level with the President of the United States, Donald Trump. This was stated by Volodymyr Zelensky. According to him, NSDC Secretary Rustem Umerov reported on the results of the negotiations, during which the parties discussed both security guarantees and documents on the reconstruction and economic development of Ukraine. Zelensky noted that during the negotiations, they discussed difficult issues, the basic framework for ending the war, and the Ukrainian side presented possible options for finalizing the relevant document.
It is important that Ukraine continues to unite the efforts of the European and American teams. Together, they discussed in particular documents on reconstruction and economic development. We understand that the American side will be in contact with Russia, and we are expecting feedback, whether the aggressor is truly ready to end the war. After returning to Kyiv, our negotiating team will report on all the details of the meetings. We are also informing our partners about the consequences of Russian strikes. This clearly shows that Moscow is not reconsidering its priorities. In this context, it's necessary for the pressure on Russia to increase in proportion to how intensively the negotiating teams are working. The realism of future security guarantees must be proven by our partners' ability at this stage to exert effective pressure on the aggressor. We are preparing new appropriate contacts with our partners. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The U.S. Department of Justice will file criminal charges against the crew members of an oil tanker, Bello 1, also known as Marinera, which was detained in the Atlantic Ocean for violating American sanctions. This was announced by U.S. Attorney General Pamela Bondi on the social network X, adding that the U.S. Department of Justice is monitoring the movements of several other vessels that may face similar measures. And as a reminder, just recently, 2 tankers from the so-called Russian Shadow Fleet were detained by the U.S. Armed Forces. First, they boarded the vessel Bella 1, which, after being pursued by the Coast Guard, changed its name and raised the Russian flag. And just a few hours later, in the Caribbean Sea, American forces took control of another sanctioned vessel from the Russian Shadow Fleet, the tanker Sofia. The Russian Foreign Ministry has already accused the United States of the allegedly illegal seizure of the tanker Mariner in the North Atlantic.